It's probably part of your daily life, even if you don't notice it. And yet it kills an estimated 7 million people each year. Air pollution. Sometimes it gets so bad you can see it. These episodes, like this one in Beijing, are commonly called airpocalypse. Now, China is no stranger to pollution, but it's increasingly taking radical measures to clean up the air. This year, authorities went so far as to ban firecrackers during Chinese New Year, a sacrifice locals were ready to make in order to get their blue skies back.
We used to set off a lot of fireworks when I was a kid, but these days the government wants to fight air pollution. You can see that it's not as bad this year. Before, the only way to escape the smog would be to go overseas, but now the air quality is really good.
Around the world, countries are waking up and taking steps to tackle air pollution. Governments are cutting back on diesel fuel, getting cars off the street and people on public transport. But what if all this actually made global warming worse? Wait, how can cleaning up the air be bad for the planet? At the heart of this paradox are microscopic polluting particles floating around in our atmosphere called aerosols. Aerosols have mirror-like properties, which means they act like shields. They reflect sunlight back into space and thus help keep the planet cool. Aerosols exist in nature. Back in 1783, Benjamin Franklin observed that tiny particles from volcanic eruptions tended to chill the weather. And it's widely accepted that the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia caused the year without a summer in 1816. More recently, the 1991 eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines caused global average temperatures to drop by 0.5 degrees Celsius for the following 15 months. Nature aside, man-made activities have resulted in an excess of aerosols in the atmosphere, and they're slowly killing us. The tiny particles burrow deep into our bodies, causing damage to our heart and lungs. So here's the hitch. On the one hand, aerosols are extremely dangerous, so we should get rid of them, right? But cleaning up the air could increase global warming and the catastrophic climate effects that go with it. It seems like we're in a trap.
Of course, we want to get rid of the air pollution in East Asia. That's obvious, and it's also ongoing. But removing this air pollution will also have the effect of removing a cooling that they've had on the surface of both India and China for a while now. And removing that cooling will probably have an impact both on temperature and on rainfall in the region, maybe also on the monsoon system.
According to recent studies, the cooling effect of aerosols is massive. Were they to disappear overnight, global temperatures would rise by up to 1 degree Celsius. That's a huge increase. It seems that reaching international climate targets could be trickier than we originally thought. It's a real climate dilemma. Do we have to choose between eliminating air pollution and limiting global warming? Maybe not. A research team from Harvard University in the United States has turned the question on its head. What if we stymied climate change by artificially injecting non-polluting aerosols into the atmosphere? Sounds straight out of a Hollywood sci-fi blockbuster, and yet that's what they want to experiment. For now, they're thinking about spraying frozen water, but eventually other elements could do the trick, like diamond dust or sulfur. Scientifically manipulating the climate has a name: geoengineering, and it's extremely controversial.
Geoengineering means deliberately manipulating the Earth's climate to reduce global warming. Ideas range from putting giant sunshades in space to sucking carbon dioxide from the air and burying it underground.
Critics say it's a far-fetched fix for climate change that could have a catastrophic domino effect.
When we modify a system, we modify it in its entirety. If at some point we stop, say for example because of an economic crisis or for another reason, the cooling effect could stop working. The temperature could rise again and we'd have a domino effect. So we'd have to be sure to be able to inject sulfur into the atmosphere for the next decades, even centuries, which seems to be an absolutely huge challenge for society.
Are climate engineers playing with nature and threatening human lives? We asked geoengineering poster boy David Keith.
The climate change that comes from emissions of carbon dioxide is more or less permanent. When we stop emissions, when we change the whole world's energy system to stop emissions, when we do that, we don't make the climate problem go away, we just stop making the problem worse. Solar geoengineering is one of the things we might do to reduce the risk of those cumulative emissions. There is a danger that research on this topic, even talking about this topic, will be exploited by anti-environmental forces who wish to fight against emissions cuts. We're in the middle of a grand battle on climate about how much we should cut emissions, where many of us, the environmental community, wants to make really rapid emissions cuts. But some people, particularly people who make a lot of profit off fossil fuels or fossil-rich nations, want to stop emissions cuts.
It's a risky bet with uncertain results, and it opens a Pandora's box of ethical questions. If it worked, who would benefit? Who would suffer? Who would pay? And who would have their hand on the global temperature dial? Perhaps most importantly, do we have a right to play God with the climate in the name of fighting global warming?